And how about democracy? There is no democracy. We no longer live in a world of nations and ideologies. The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business. And I have chosen you to preach this adventure.
That system is our enemy. But when you're inside, you look around, what do you see? Businessmen, teachers, lawyers, carpenters, the very minds of the people we are trying to save. But until we do, these people are still a part of that system, and that makes them our enemy. You have to understand, most of these people are not ready to, and many of them are so inert, so hopelessly dependent on the system, that they will fight to protect it. Or were you looking at the woman in the red dress? I was. Look again.
Well, I was analysing through, this World Bankers video I made yesterday. I was just going through that and stuff. And what I want to do is briefly point out and summarise the things I noticed based on there to simplify. And like I said, what I realised when I was going back through was the 2.3 million budget mentioned by looks like a previous president, somebody of American Congress. Was a video to show their American funding 2.3 million.
$1 trillion in transactions.
And amazingly, that exact place that quote plane hit was where all the computers were stored for what Rumsfeld talked about.
I get tired of saying that defense is to be made an excuse for wasting dollars. I don't think we should pay 1 cent for defense more than we have to.
I seriously question an increase in the Pentagon budget in the face of the department's recent Inspector General's report. How can we seriously consider a $50 billion increase in the defense budget when DOD's own auditors say the department cannot account for $2.3 trillion in transactions in 1 year alone?
It is, I was going to say terrifying. It is such a monumental task. I have met with 2 former officials of the Pentagon who served in the budget and controller and those areas. And I've mused over the fact that I've read some of these things and asked what they thought.
We process nearly 10 million paychecks a month. 10 million times to get things screwed up. I've had my pay screwed up 6 times since I've been in the department. And it's really bad when you screw up your boss's pay.
I doubt, to be honest, that people inside the department are going to be capable of sorting this out. I have a feeling it's going to take some folks from outside to come in and look at this and put in place a process that over a period, and I regret to say, but I've seen how long things take. I think it's going to take a period of years to sort it out, and I think it'll probably take the cooperation of the Congress to try to get the system so that you can actually manage the financial aspects of that institution rather than simply report on things that have happened imperfectly. There's more oversight over the Head Start program than there is over the entire military budget.
It's a terrible record. And it's preposterous that the Defense Department doesn't know what's happened to this money.
This situation's a disgrace. It tells me that we can't meet our constitutional obligations to the taxpayers of our country to make sure that things are honestly and legally spent.
We were told major cuts in education programs, and then we read, well, you know, $500 million is paid per year that isn't owed.
It is an incredible thing that we arm the world and then turn around and come to Congress and say, look at all these weapons out there. They're almost superior to ours. They're comparable to ours. Well, of course they are. They're ours. We sold them to them.
Since the end of the Cold War, we've sold more military weapons than the rest of the world combined.
My name is Jack Shanahan, Vice Admiral, U.S. Navy, retired. One of our nuclear bombs blows up Hiroshima 15 times over. 5 devastates Russia. After that, this is how many the U.S. has left. I feel safe reducing nuclear weapons.
Where he talks about unwanted threats of America. And what I was thinking was Donald Rumsfeld, September the 10th, 2001. And you know, where they had the hearing of wanting to know what happened to 2.3 trillion, which had basically gone missing or been spent without anybody knowing or being able to investigate. What I tied together was, you know, 2.3 million rolled military US budget, and then you know, this mission 2.3 trillion is most likely you know, the mission money towards again planned military budget. You know, all it is a trillion from a million up, you know, up in price, and tied to what was previously a 2.3 million American budget, up to 2.3. It's exactly the same, analysed up to price. And around the time what that looked like, it probably was cheaper in warfare terms, stateside tax, etc., or, you know, military warfare itself, technological, as to say, you know, it would probably have gone up to 2.3 trillion around the 21st century, 2001. As I said, this is what I was saying in that video too. I mean, I can't see how the Pentagon or anybody didn't know where 2.3 trillion had gone. When you look at that, the size in that video, what they showed us, what the size is in you know, dollars, in stacks and stuff, at 2.3 trillion. It's hard to see how that could go missing from the Pentagon's budget or be spent without knowing, unless, you know, they were having fun with it, which wouldn't have been the real truth behind it. So all I know is 2.3 million old American budget, 2.3 trillion goes missing from the Pentagon 2001, September the 10th. Most likely a military budget up to tax and price, which was most likely pre-planned for what the next day was 9/11, false flag operations and stuff, what was suspected of a pre-planned war in the Middle East and stuff. They did, like I said, regarding that one and stuff. There's no other obviousness to the 2.3 trillion going missing, tied to that, other to say it was most likely a pre-planned war for in the Middle East, which they had pre-planned most likely, seeing as the 2.3 trillion had been spent, had gone missing before September the 10th, and all of a sudden the next day 9/11 happens, and not long after there's a war over the Middle East and stuff, Iraq and stuff. So most likely on that one is, you know, that's what it ties to me if I was going to investigate, or a point to you know, this 2.3 trillion, which they still most likely haven't found out where it was spent. And like I said, military warfare, it most likely goes up in price, plus to do to taxes stuff, and like technology itself, as to say, from the old video to the 2001, and as I said, 2.3 million, 2.3 trillion. The obviousness is there regarding you know, the money behind that going missing, and that was the first one I pointed onto the Federal Reserve. And I want to be more thorough in that. What I noticed before was basically what ties suspicion to that one is what ties to another video regarding some more missing money, what was from the Pentagon. First of all, we'll remember that probably was the Pentagon or American Federal Reserve itself, what I showed on the video. It was a hearing, the lady speaking to a man, questioning her, and like I said, it was regarding the Federal Reserve and some Bloomberg was
Coleman, you're the
mentioned.
Inspector General for the Federal Reserve, right? Okay.
That's correct.
Have you done any investigations concerning the Federal Reserve's role in deciding not to save Lehman Brothers, which led to shockwaves that went through the entire financial system?
In that particular area, I don't generally comment on specific investigations, but we do not currently have an investigation in that particular area.
All right. What about the $1 trillion plus in expansion of the Federal Reserve's balance sheet since last September? Have you conducted any investigations regarding that?
Right now we have a, we call it a review, and I don't know if the term investigation may have different connotations. So we're actually conducting a fairly high-level review of the various lending facilities collectively, which would include, the TALF, a variety of the different programs that are in process. So we're looking at them at a fairly high level to identify risk.
Well, I understand that, but we're talking about events that started unfolding 8 months ago. Have you reached any conclusions about the Fed expanding its balance sheet by over $1 trillion since last September?
We have not yet reached any conclusions.
Do you know who received that money?
For the, we're in the process right now of doing our review, and
Right, but you're the Inspector General. My question to you specifically is, do you know who received that $1 trillion plus that the Fed extended and put on its balance sheet since last September? Do you know the identity of the recipients?
I do not know. We have not looked at that specific area at this particular point on those reviews.
What about Bloomberg's report that there are trillions of dollars in off-balance sheets transactions that the Federal Reserve has entered into since last September? Are you familiar with those off-balance sheet transactions?
I think it may be important at this point, too, just to bring up a certain aspect related to our jurisdiction. And just to clarify perhaps some of my earlier comments, we are the Inspector General for the Board of Governors, and we have direct oversight over board programs and operations, and are also able to look at board-delegated functions to the reserve banks, as well as the board's oversight and supervision of the reserve banks. We do not have jurisdiction to directly go out and audit reserve bank activities specifically. Nevertheless, in our lending facilities project, for example, we are looking at the board's oversight over the program, and to the extent that extends out to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York.
Well, I have a copy of the Inspector General Act here in front of me, and it says, among other things, that it's your responsibility to conduct and supervise audits and investigations relating to the programs and operations of your agency.
That's correct.
So I'm asking you if your agency has, in fact, according to Bloomberg, extended $9 trillion in credit, which, by the way, works out to $30,000 for every single man, woman, and child in this country. I'd like to know, if you're not responsible for investigating that, who is?
We have responsibility for the Federal Reserve's programs and operations audits, to conduct audits and investigations in that area. In terms of who's responsible for investigating, would you mind repeating the question one more time?
What have you done to investigate the off-balance sheet transactions conducted by the Federal Reserve, which, according to Bloomberg, now total $9 trillion in the last 8 months?
I'll have to look specifically at that Bloomberg article. I'm not, I don't know if I have actually seen that particular one.
That's not the point. The question is, have you done any investigation or auditing of off-balance sheet transactions conducted by the Federal Reserve?
At this point, we're conducting our lending facility project at a fairly high level and have not gotten
And
to
where
a specific...
Bloomberg is owned by the Rothschilds themselves. as to say they either invest in that Federal Reserve as one of those bankers, the world bankers, or they do own it as they were known to in regards to the assassination of Kennedy and Abraham Lincoln, and a story that dates back to their bloodline, the Rothschilds. Like I said, that was what ties more obviousness in regards to the connections to them. Like I'll put it on there again, and what it shows is the lady, she's being asked in regards, and Bloomberg is mentioned, and it's in regards of money missing from the Federal Reserve. And Bloomberg, which you'll find out is owned by the Rothschilds himself, which shows they have connections to the Federal Reserve in America, ties to you know, their money themselves, for their investments, or what would be going through that Federal Reserve. So you know, that points out that they do have possible connections to this 9/11 false flag op with the right suspicion. Like I said, the money they've got, 500 trillion or something, is insane. And like I said, it seems a couple of times money's gone missing from the Pentagon, the 2.3 trillion, which wasn't known where it had been spent. And like I said, this video, it shows the hearing in America regarding some more, quite a big amount of money being missing, where Bloomberg is mentioned, Bloomberg Rothschild Federal Reserve. And while I move on to the Federal Reserve and what it's known, they say in the American government pages, I think it's the blue pages or something, apparently, you know, the Federal Reserve, which means federal owned, federal government of America, isn't even in the blue pages, the government owned. It's in another grey pages or something, which is basically means
That's what the politicians handed to them as a gift, you might say, for the partnership. Now, in return, what did the bankers do for the politicians? They promised to create money out of nothing, now that they've got this legal power to do it anytime the government needs it. And since 2008, we've witnessed the greatest fake money printing run in recorded history. This financial sleight of hand disguises the costs, hides who's to blame, and leaves us as debt slaves working to pay off the bill. I found it revealing that in the same year the Federal Reserve was founded, 1913, the Internal Revenue Service was also established. An income tax was then instigated so you and I would have to pay the politicians' debt, plus interest, to the bankers.
The problem is we have a privately owned central bank system in the United States disguised as a government-owned system. Now, if you look in the telephone book here in the Washington, D.C. area, you look up for Federal Reserve in the blue government pages, it's not there. It's in the white pages right next to Federal Express. It's a privately owned central bank.
What is the... If it's supposedly a Federal Reserve, why American government owned, why is it not in the blue pages of government owned but private owned pages, which means that it's not even American government owned, it means it's privately owned. And again, you know, that derives suspicion as to why. Most likely the American public, as much as everyone across the world would believe, Federal Reserve, federal government, and yet it's actually privately owned. You know, that would derive suspicion and ties to that, and the Rothschilds, Bloomberg, and you know, look, I would start asking more questions in regards to those things, in regards of the Rothschilds, etc., and what's behind what's in their situation. So you know, I pointed that one out as well, and like I was saying before, what ties to the most likely possibility of this war being behind regarding, you know, the war is, the motives behind it is a bankers' war. And what I'll recap on that is, like I said, America in debt with China, China wanting to build land, build on American land, Russia are in debt with, I think Russia's possibly in debt with America. America doesn't have full economic control of Russia. Russia's just struggling economically. It's tying with China to make their own economic terms. You know, that would cause conflict between bankers, businessmen in the first place, regarding you know, economics and the system itself. You know, if you basically have bankers, businessmen who are losing profits and money, and that's going on. You know, the Federal Reserve of America, the CEO of China, Bank of China, Russia, etc. Now that's going to cause conflict if they're all wanting profit or business with each other, and one's taking more money, or they're not having full control or stuff. And you could see why in the eyes of businessmen, say if what's suspected to be them causing these false flag and wars, it would be the real motive behind what's going on. Like I said, not long before all this stuff was going on as well. Probably around 2012, near enough when Putin had that conference, something was regarding that America and UK's bankers wanted full economic control of the federal central bank in Russia. And it was regarding, like you said, the ruble, what Russia's struggling on. And like you said, all those connections to debts or wanting control between those countries are actually at war, ironically, or most likely go to. We've got China, Russia and America as the main three, and what's showing ties to bankers and their economic circumstances as to why the motives really will be, why most likely these wars are over, and they're nothing to do with what the public has seemed to see as terrorist attacks and stuff. To me, it's just for them to cause a war, because like what I was saying is a metaphoric analogical term of bankers. If they're seen as gangster bankers, you've got to imagine it as like gangsters or gangs, in ghettos or council estates or whatever. And so it was like a business term. And like I said, how gangs battle usually, or as you see on games or films sometimes, they have gang wars with firearms and stuff. They basically go gang war. And if you imagine these bankers as gangsters, they're like gangs, but the gangs are what they would call armies, a bit more higher in firepower. But you've got to see it no different to applicated from a gang war over money, replicated to militaries owned by gangster bankers. And that's what it would be seen as in regards of what it would really be. And as I said, as much as sometimes organised criminals do, they're not fussed about who gets in the way of their wars, or as much as gangster bankers wouldn't, about causing false flag ops to fool people into believing that's what they're about, terrorist attacks, just so they can get economic control and more money, business and following on from here as well is, what ties more to the Rothschild in regards of, what ties to most likely, one world army, one world government style thing, what David Icke was on about. In an interview I saw Evelyn Rothschild, what he mentioned in regards of economic system, a couple of weird things on these interviews were, first of all, he talked about the plan or the need for international currency. I believe it was him or another banker. If it was him, though, he partially mentioned it. If not, it was my mistake, but there was another banker, a world one. But basically what was mentioned was international currency needed. Now international means worldwide, and like I said, if you look at the euro and Europe itself, it's basically it's a continental currency, and even those countries are their separate countries, they still run off the same system of money economically, and that's.
Be a situation. You mentioned a so-called currency problem. I mean, do you see the day in the next 5 years where it's fully convertible and flexible?
Well, you're talking to a person who's quite old. If I'm around in 5 years, I'd like to think that that is the case. I think we've all got to move towards that opportunity, and I think the challenge also is whether we should move towards an international currency, because the speculation and the complexity of currency has caused some of the irritation, not only among the trading nations, but among individuals. But it's not for me to say how it will happen, but I think everyone who knows how to deal with these situations is very cognizant of the problem it takes to get over it, and I think the renminbi will become more convertible. But when it'll come, that is a matter for, obviously, the powers that be.
I want to just change tack slightly. Of course, China's seen, central China, parts of central China, seen the worst drought that they've had in many decades. Now, you've got this investment with your wife in Weather Central. How could that actually help out in terms of planning for things such as droughts?
Well, I think that first of all, we have 25 broadcast clients currently in China, and we are the #1 provider of broadcast weather graphic solutions in the country. I mean, you've had this downpour, I believe, in the last 24 hours, which has caused even people losing their lives, and situations like this. With the detail that we can put up through the technology that we give to the various weather stations, this makes people more aware of it. On the whole, it's a question of giving the opportunity. I mean, we have also launched an operation called My Weather, which gains access to the first truly personalized weather application for the web and mobile devices. You can go up on myweather.com and you can find out within a kilometre of where you are what is going to happen to the weather. It also gives a 10-day forecast.
I think we've got to be aware that we're living in a time, I'm not going to get into the subject, which is a huge subject of climate change, but we do have variations of all sorts around the world. Certainly in England we have very precarious weather. We've had a drought up until about 10 days ago. And I think it is important to realize that you can use technology, which is offered by myweather.com.
Capitalist, basically a continent. Basically what capitalism means, owned by private owners, which would be private banks that run the EU and stuff, as to what's going on over there and stuff. Like I said, it's weird, and like I said, if you imagine that private owned, basically where the economic system is privately owned, it's not even government run, and most likely that means private owned would be banks and stuff. But where it gets bad is basically it's an economic struggle for those people in those countries if capitalism is introduced, and where the EU is showing that. And as you saw what's happened, not just Britain but Spain and Greece have been having a lot of problems economically and stuff, economic crisis and stuff, recessions. Britain not long ago, Spain and Greece are showing the struggle, and these are well near enough, even though Britain's not euro paid. All I know is Spain and Greece are EU euro run, and what they're showing all three countries regarding this is what ties to to that. Now say if I believe it was Evelyn Rothschild anyway talked about international currency being required, or the other banker who most likely knows anyway. If you imagine what that happened in regards of a capitalist ran Europe, you can imagine what it would be applicated to internationally, worldwide. And the struggle for the people ran under a capitalist world, where basically everything would be private owned across the world. People would really struggle for money more, and if you're worried about or are not happy about money in the first place, wage wise and stuff, or tax wise, this is going to get worse for you, or if you regard that. But it does tie to Rothschilds and stuff of what they're talking about, and what I suspect it tied to a little bit to do with what he also mentioned was something to do with applications on phones that he has, what they're making. And although it's not fully obvious, the ties to the global surveillance program, and what they were going on about in there was basically the apps on phones were spying people and stuff, what are tied to the GSP and stuff on phones. And like I said, what ties to the Federal Reserve and the suspicions with the Rothschilds tied to there, derives suspicion on my side in regards to their connections to it all. And that's what I saw on that one. So basically what refers back to international currency, which is basically a capitalist continent, ran continent, which is the EU, which is showing a lot of recession and financial struggle. We're tied to international struggle, and where capitalist ran world would basically be even worse, because it would show that they're private owned countries across the world by one power or one bank or a group of bankers, and those people wouldn't even have the choice much, and how they much they get even more. And it all ties to international currency, new world order, capitalist and stuff. It's weird, and I take that into consideration as well. Just guys, the other banker I was on about also did mention especially itself was international currency and stuff. And what regarded him was it was basically certainly hinting what would look like Tolwood theory was the world that we're going to work in, or you're going to work in 2016. And what led from there was international currency would be required, gross development or something which ties to international currency, capitalism, where things are more private owned. And to me what ties to what seems to be a World War III about to happen, and what would happen after this war would be, to me, what looks like maybe a possible side of him, tied to what he says on there, is basically what's tied to this new world order, and basically you'll be shackled slaves and stuff, and it's very, very serious stuff. Talks about the momentary system, and what ties back to Henry Ford, what he said, if America knew about the momentary system, banking system, there would be a revolution towards before tomorrow morning. And what I was trying to win was basically he was a businessman. And you know, he would have had ties with the Federal Reserve probably itself, or the banking system, of what he knew about them, and more about the insights to as to why he knew it wasn't fair, which will lead on to further into C, to say, you know, if people discovered how shit they were being trapped and how much they were being scammed by the Federal Reserve, private-owned bank, they would be pissed off, and they would have a revolution in terms of protesting. And that's what I noticed from that. To what I was saying on there, you know, well, again, this banker is the owner, the CEO of the World Bank itself. And when I looked on their site, it basically says they fund or near enough own governments across the world, and they give them money, which means they are a private bank themselves, or a central bank, and stuff like that. What I'll leave on the video as a screenshot. You know, to put more into the factor that they are private owned. Most likely he puts his investments into the Federal Reserve as one of the banks in the world, and probably has ties and connections with the Rothschilds, you know, as they work as businessmen. But you know, it looks like, in fairness, also what a tie to what Russia was saying, to explain one of the representatives of Russia, and what he was explaining on this interview was that they're basically separate from the EU in regards of economic terms, which would mean, you know, probably as to why this economic war is happening. They were basically saying those EU countries are struggling on the GDP, the gross development system, and like I said, since they went into it, and what Russia are trying to do themselves is they're trying to keep themselves separate from that, because of the economic struggle. And this would explain that if they're not part of the EU economic system, which is like I said, capitalist owned continent, even Eastern Europe, the rest of it probably explains why you know, these bankers who own these other banks want a war with Russia to get that full control, because they're basically near enough in control of their own bank. And as I said, businessman terms, they will want to get hold of that bank with the bonuses to Snowden's side and stuff of what he took from NSA. And to me, you know, the obviousness points out in these ties and connections with you know, bankers of the world and stuff, and what's going on, and the real motives behind these wars, and the like I said, the real motives behind. And that was just one of the things I noticed and stuff. And like I said, world bankers, and this is called the World Bank. What he was talking about had a lot of stuff to what he was saying, and in his terms of international currency and stuff, and what ties to that one. And I keep that in mind as well. Like I said, there's a reason why Russia are adamant to keep themselves separate from the EU, in regards of what this man mentions in regards of you know, the breakdown, the recession across Europe itself, Central Europe, regarding you know, the euro and stuff, which is capitalist owned, private owned banks, and you know, the euro itself and its value, and what follow on with decreased deflation, inflation and stuff further on. But like I said, it all explains as to why, if they're not part of this euro, and what ties to what I've been saying, most likely this is part of the motives of the real war, banker gangsters and false flag ops and stuff. What regards as well is, like you said, the Rothschilds, both Evelyn Rothschild and Jacob Rothschild, and their connections to the EU, etc. First of all, Evelyn Rothschild mentioned actually where I got it from was that's what's required is you know, a capitalist run system, in regards of you know, having more control over those countries' private owned banks and stuff, and you know, economic profits and stuff, to say, you know, they have connections to having private owned banks or investments in those central banks private owned, especially the Federal Reserve, what ties back to Bloomberg, etc. What I've said previously regarding this missing money regarding another case in America. And what tied back to Jacob Rothschild is where he mentions the crisis in Greece, where he was at the time, and he basically was talking about economic solutions basically to bring back profits into its system and boost it. But like I said, their connections to the euro, and referring back to Evelyn Rothschild, where it talks about capitalist ran banking systems across the EU, etc., and near enough, especially Britain, to say basically, that it ties more the obviousness that they have involvement with the euro itself and the capitalist ran Central Europe mainly, partly Eastern Europe, and tied to the economic crisis over there, especially Spain and Greece, where Jacob Rothschild was at the time this recession was going on. And I'll put that one on there as well. I'm just going through the notes little by little. I'm a bit asleep to follow on to, like you said, the connections. Now we're realising that Bloomberg is connected to Federal Reserve America, and what ties back to JF Kennedy and Abraham Lincoln, and their murders and stuff, assassinations and stuff. Like I said, they both had connections in regards to the Federal Reserve itself. I believe they wanted a fairer economic system, or even take down the ownership of the Federal Reserve, to make a better, economic system for the American people. Well, they were fairly trapped, and as I said, more than coincidentally, they've assassinated all of a sudden and stuff. To me, it's a bit suspicious, and I was wondering as to why. If you can't see, especially the ties to banks, if I was looking into that as a criminal investigation, and the only people that I would see would have the motive to kill them, in regards to whether both their murders and where they were both assassinated, but was to do with banks or bankers, to say that they were the people who had them killed and not just some random men who didn't like them. And like I said, also what people don't know either is the connection with Russia and Russia's President Alexander Tsar at the time where Abraham Lincoln was killed. Not long after, a year or so, Alexander Tsar, President of Russia, was assassinated, and he also was having issues, what was said, with economic takeover over to Russia, as much as Abraham Lincoln did, with the Federal Reserve on his side, tied to the Civil War. And it's more than weird that basically two presidents of two countries are killed around the same time as each other. 1776 or whatever it was, around the Civil War area, not long after. And like I said, Abraham Lincoln, Alexander Tsar, both killed in regards of economic control, Federal Reserve or central banks in both the countries. And as I said, it all ties back to the bankers and what the Rothschilds' history was, around the time before they founded America, or were known to. Like I said, it was said they pre-planned the New World Order, and like I said, they found in America, for what I was trying to in the mind of a businessman, to make more profit. I mean, if I was, say if I wanted to, I was a banker, and I wanted to basically, all those years ago, and I saw open native land America, and I thought, if I wanted to make profit, the only way you can is place a load of people over there, make it highly populated, more than it was with the Native Americans, build a civilization, build a bank there, and have a Federal Reserve there, and you would be able to make more economic profit. It's a very big country to fill, and when the Irish, etc., Europeans and stuff emigrated there, which I'm not against, it's just the fact, in the eyes of the bankers, what it would have been in their eyes is, when they pre-planned, if they wanted to make big profits, big time, quick, in their eyes, it'd be free people and banking systems and tax and stuff. And you imagine the eyes of seeing this big piece of land, North America, as it was, Native American colonised at the time. And you were thinking in your eyes, if we could found this land as a new country, and they'd emigrate people over there, and the more people there, the more profit would make via the tax system. Surely you would do that yourself if you were in the eyes of that time of mind of a man of we wanted to plan of economic profit. In the eyes, it makes sense. It was a big open piece of land to them, where they had a lot of potential to make profit. Like I said before, it's what ties to Russia, and probably why they want economic control of there, because if they have full economic control, the amount of the population of Russia and you know, its economic system. They have full control of that, every single bit of tax from every person for that banking system. The more money they'll make. What I said as an analogy of a bank, you know, having full control of a supermarket. Say if you had partial investors or partners, and you wanted full profit from the customers and stuff and buy from there, you want to try and get your own ownership from it as well. And that makes sense in my eyes of what gangster bankers would want in regards of the pre-planned New World Order, Lincoln getting in the way and stuff. If that makes sense to me, it should to you anyway. So that's how I see that anyway. If I was in the eyes of them, what I was putting across, and what the video did say to try and explain as simple as possible regarding, you know, the Federal Reserve. The video what was shown on there is basically what briefly or simply put he was trying to say. The Federal Reserve specifically, all those central bank banks, they're basically debt makers for, you know, the CEOs of those banks. You know, it's all added interest via, you know, money which is near enough worthless. And what that system runs on is making more debt for the taxpayer. And the taxpayers are basically, you know, tax is basically interest in regards to the pockets of those bankers. And you know, that's what tax near enough is. You know, it's basically money that's not needed to be taken, you know, from the people themselves of those countries. And you know, that's what I was trying to say.
Responsible for most of the inequality in our world today. The powers that be do not want you to know about this, as this system is what has kept them at the top of the financial food chain for the last 100 years. Learning this will change your life because it'll change the choices that you make. If enough people learn it, it'll change the world because it'll change the system. For this is the biggest hidden secret of money. Never in human history have so many been plundered by so few, and it's all accomplished through this, the biggest scam in the history of mankind. They say that money doesn't grow on trees, but the truth is that the modern banking system creates currency far faster than trees can grow. Most people don't have a clue how currency is created. Economists and bankers make it sound so complex that people think they can't understand it. But I'm going to strip our monetary system down to its essence so that you can see the scam behind the curtain and just how it affects you. Every modern society creates currency in pretty much the same way. But since the US dollar is the majority of the world's currency, I'm going to use the United States as our example. It all starts when some politician says, vote for me and I'll make sure the government provides you more free stuff than my opponent will. But there's no such thing as a free lunch. So to provide that supposedly free stuff, the politicians vote for the country to spend more than its income. This is called deficit spending. To pay for that deficit spending, the Treasury borrows currency by issuing a bond. So what's a bond? If you think about it, a bond is really nothing but a glorified IOU. It's a pretty piece of paper with numbers printed on it that says, loan me $1 trillion today, and I promise over a 10-year period I'm going to pay you back that $1 trillion plus interest. But what you need to understand is that Treasury bonds are our national debt. These glorified IOUs are to be paid back by you and I and our descendants through future taxation. Therefore, when the government issues a bond, it steals prosperity out of the future so that it can spend it today. The Treasury then holds a bond auction, and the world's largest banks show up and compete to buy part of our national debt and make a profit on it by earning interest. You'll notice that as we move through this process, the big banks are there, taking a cut every step of the way. This isn't by chance, as you'll see shortly. Then, through a shell game called open market operations, the banks get to sell some of those bonds to the Federal Reserve at a profit. To pay for the bonds, the Federal Reserve opens up its big old checkbook and writes bad, bogus, counterfeit checks that should bounce because they draw on an account that always has a zero balance. There isn't one penny in there. To quote from the Boston Federal Reserve, when you or I write a check, there must be sufficient funds in our account to cover that check. But when the Federal Reserve writes a check, there is no bank deposit on which that check is drawn. When the Federal Reserve writes a check, it is creating money. The Fed then hands those checks to the banks, and at this point, currency springs into existence. The banks then take that currency and buy more bonds at the next Treasury auction. But what is a check? A check is also an IOU. When you write a check, you're making a note that says, here's my IOU for cash. All you have to do is go to the bank and pick it up. Now, it's very, very important that you understand this process, because we're going to come back later and show you the devastating effect this has on you. The Treasury issues IOUs, bonds. The banks then buy those IOUs with currency. The Federal Reserve then writes IOUs, checks, and hands them to the banks in exchange for the Treasury's IOUs, the bonds. And currency is created. So what's really happening is the Federal Reserve and the Treasury are just swapping IOUs, using the banks as middlemen, and abracadabra, presto, currency magically springs into existence. This process repeats and repeats over and over again, enriching the banks and indebting the public by raising the national debt. The end result is that there's a buildup of bonds at the Federal Reserve and currency at the Treasury. This process is also where all paper currency comes from. The Federal Reserve and the government mistakenly call it base money because they didn't watch episode 1 of this series and they don't know the difference between money and currency. But I will correctly refer to it as base currency because it is not money. It is currency, and as we've learned, there is a big difference. Money has to be a store of value and maintain its purchasing power over long periods of time. We learned in episode 1 that earlier in our history, our paper currency was just a claim check. It was a representation for real money of intrinsic value, the gold and silver that was held on deposit at the Treasury. You could walk into any bank and slap your currency, like say a $20 bill, on the counter and redeem it for real money, a $20 gold piece. But now, this base currency that's piling up back here is really nothing but a receipt or a claim check on an IOU, that bond. So it's really nothing but a supply of numbers. The Treasury then deposits the newly created currency into the various branches of the government, and the politicians say, hey, thanks for that, and the government does some deficit spending on public works, social programs, and war. The government employees, contractors, and soldiers then deposit their pay in the banks. Now this may come as a shock to you, but when you deposit your currency with the bank, you're not actually depositing it into an account to be safely held in trust for you. Instead, you're actually loaning the bank your currency, and within certain legal limits they can do with it pretty much anything they please. This includes gambling in the stock market and loaning it out, at a profit of course. Now this is where the machine of currency creation really gets cranking, because this is where something called fractional reserve lending comes into play. Fractional reserve lending is exactly what it says. The banks are allowed to reserve only a fraction of your deposit and loan the rest out. Although reserve ratios may vary, I'm going to use a 10% reserve ratio as our example. If you deposit $100 in your account, the bank can legally take $90 of it and loan it out without telling you. The bank must hold $10 of your deposit in reserve just in case you want some of it. These reserves are called vault cash. But why does your bank account still say you have $100 if the bank has stolen $90 of it? Because the bank left IOUs it created, called bank credit, in its place. Now I know this sounds crazy, but here it is in black and white from the Fed. Commercial banks create checkbook money when they grant a loan simply by adding new deposit dollars in accounts on their books in exchange for a borrower's IOU. These are nothing but numbers that the banks type into their computers. And even though these bank credit IOU numbers are very different from base currency numbers, because they only exist in computers, they are still currency. So now, there's $190 in existence. Now the reason people take out loans from the banks is to buy something. They're going to buy a house or a car or something like that. So the borrower takes the $90 that the bank loaned to him from your account, and he pays the seller of the item. But then the seller deposits that currency into his account, and his bank loans out 90% of that and leaves bank credit numbers in its place. So now there's $271 in existence. This process repeats and repeats until under a 10% reserve ratio, an initial deposit of just $100 can create up to $1,000 of bank credit, all backed by $100 of vault cash, just 10%. But as I said, reserve ratios vary wildly. On some deposits it's 10%, on others it's 3%, and on some forms of deposits reserve requirements are 0. The result is that the expansion of the currency supply by the banks is far greater than even this example would lead you to believe. So once again, when currency is deposited in the banks get to lend it out, and then it gets redeposited and relent, redeposited and relent, redeposited and relent over and over again, creating bank credit all the way. This is where the vast majority of our currency supply comes from. In fact, 92 to 96% of all currency in existence is created, not by the government, but here in the banking system. Now, massive amounts of currency spewing into society may at first sound like a fun idea. That is, until you remember one of the most important hidden secrets of money from episode 1, that the prices of everyday goods and services act as a sponge on an expanding currency supply. The more currency we have, the more prices rise. This is where inflation comes from. The true definition of inflation is an expansion of the currency supply. Rising prices are merely a symptom. So our entire currency supply is nothing but a couple of bucks whipped up in this hocus-pocus scam where the Treasury and the Federal Reserve swap glorified IOUs, and a bunch of numbers that the banks just type into their computers. That's it. That's our entire currency supply. It's nothing but a supply of numbers. Some of them printed, most of them typed. And there is nothing else. But if you thought that was crazy, get ready to enter the twilight zone of modern economics. We work for some of that currency supply. True wealth is your time. But we trade away moments of our lives, hour by hour, day by day, and year by year, for numbers that somebody printed on pieces of paper or just typed into a computer. Now those numbers represent our blood, sweat, tears, labor, ideas, and talent. We are what gives the currency its value. But here comes the really cool joke. We work hard so that we can save some of that currency, so that we can pay the tax collector. In the United States, it's known as the IRS. They then turn it over to the Treasury so that the Treasury can pay the principal plus interest on that bond that the Federal Reserve bought with a check drawn on an account that has nothing in it. Now let's do a recap on this section, because this is where the system begins to rob you and I on a massive scale. Much of our taxes are not used for schools, roads, and public services, but to pay interest on bonds that the Federal Reserve bought with a check drawn on an account that has nothing in it. The Federal Reserve is committing fraud. But here's one of the biggest secrets of them all. Before the establishment of the Federal Reserve, there was no need for personal income tax. The Federal Reserve was created in 1913, and that very same year, the Constitution was amended to allow income tax. Do you really think this was just a coincidence? Ask yourself how much income tax you've paid over your lifetime. Much of it has been silently siphoned away into the hands of those who own the system. Yes, this system has owners. Who they are is an even bigger secret that we'll get to shortly. But first, we need to understand the mumbo-jumbo of the so-called debt ceiling. It's all based on a huge paradox. There was interest due on that bond. And there was interest due on every one of those loans that the banks made. That means that there is interest due on every dollar in existence. Let me ask you something. If you borrow the very first dollar into existence, and that's the only dollar that exists on the planet, but you promise to pay it back plus another dollar's worth of interest, Where do you get the second dollar to pay the interest? The answer is that you have to borrow that one into existence and promise to pay it back with interest as well. So now there are $2 in existence, but you owe 4, and so on and so on. The result is there's never enough currency to pay the debt. There is always more debt in the system than there is currency in existence to pay the debt. Therefore, the whole system is impossible. It is finite. It will come to an end one day. What would happen if the government stopped borrowing to do deficit spending? Are the payments on those treasury bonds going to stop? What would happen if the public stopped borrowing and going deeper into debt? Are your house and car payments going to stop? No. There is a payment due every month on the principal plus the interest on every dollar in existence, and those payments do not stop. If we stop borrowing, then no new currency is created to replace the currency that we used to make those payments. Whether you're making a payment on a loan or paying tax to make a payment on a bond, the portion of the payment that goes to pay off the principal extinguishes that portion of the debt. But the debt also extinguishes the currency. Currency and debt are like matter and antimatter. When they meet, they annihilate each other. If we just pay off the principal only on all the loans and bonds that exist, the entire currency supply just vanishes. So if we don't go deeper into debt every year, look what happens. The whole thing goes into a deflationary collapse under the weight of those payments. Politicians and pundits alike talk about balancing the budget, paying down the debt, and living within our means. They don't understand that that is deflationary. It is impossible to do under our current monetary system without collapsing the whole economy. This is why any talk of a debt ceiling is not only ridiculous, it's delusional. The system is designed to require ever-increasing levels of debt just to continue, and that's why politicians will always kick the can down the road and raise this so-called debt ceiling over and over again until the whole system finally collapses under its own weight. In other words, they don't want it to collapse on their watch. The founding fathers of the United States knew the dangers of central banking and fought to free themselves from this very thing. The Revolutionary War started out as a tax revolt, but now we must pay tax just to have a monetary system. Having just suffered through the hyperinflation of the continental dollar, which was printed into oblivion to finance the Revolutionary War, they understood the dangers of fiat currency and debt-based monetary systems. So to protect future generations from institutional theft and out-of-control government, they wrote into the Constitution that only gold and silver can be money for the simple fact that you can't print them. Our current system is not only unconstitutional, but it robs us of the liberty and prosperity our forefathers fought and died for. We are all feeling the effects of ignoring the Constitution right now. By forcing more currency into circulation, our purchasing power is diluted. Inflation is a slow and insidious stealth tax that is simply the result of this debt-based monetary system. This system empowers and benefits those who create the currency and receive it first, as they get to spend it into circulation before it has an effect on the economy. We're stealing purchasing power from you and transferring it to the banks and the government every hour of every day because of this false monetary system. And it's not like the people at the top don't know this. To quote the Federal Reserve, the decrease in purchasing power incurred by the holders of money due to inflation imparts gains to the issuers of money. This is a fraud. It is a pyramid scheme, it is a Ponzi scheme, it's a scam, and it's a lie. Our entire monetary system is nothing but a form of legalized theft. But here's the biggest con job of them all. The Federal Reserve is not federal, it has stockholders. There is no federal agency that has stockholders. What's a stockholder? A share of stock represents a percentage of ownership in a corporation. So the stockholders are the owners of that corporation. Therefore, the Federal Reserve is a private corporation with owners. And you can see it for yourself if you go to the Federal Reserve's website, and it will say, the stockholders receive an annual dividend of 6%. Now we know that the stock in the Federal Reserve was originally issued to the largest banks in the United States. But because of mergers and acquisitions through the years, you can't actually trace who owns the stock in the Federal Reserve. That's a very closely guarded secret. My guess would be that the owners are those primary dealers, the banks that get to make a profit by selling part of our national debt, those bonds, to the Federal Reserve, who buys them with a check for nothing. Then we pay tax to pay the principal and the interest on those bonds so that the Federal Reserve can pay the banks a 6% dividend. Don't be alarmed if you don't quite comprehend the deception of this system at first glance. Very few people do. It is purposely complex. The economist John Maynard Keynes once wrote, "By this means, government may secretly and unobserved confiscate the wealth of the people, and not one man in a million will detect the theft." I believe that presented correctly, anyone can understand this system, regardless of how complex it is. So let's do a recap and break it down even more. The way the system works is that, step 1, the government creates glorified IOUs. These bonds increase our national debt and put the public on the hook to pay it back. Step 2, IOUs are swapped to create currency. The Treasury sells the bonds to the banks. The banks then turn around and sell our national debt at a profit to the Federal Reserve, which they probably own. The Federal Reserve then opens its checkbook that doesn't have a penny in it and buys those IOUs with IOUs that it writes, checks, on a checking account that has a zero balance. Then they give those checks to the banks and currency just springs into existence. And then the whole process repeats. This results in a buildup of bonds at the Federal Reserve and currency at the Treasury, which is really just a supply of numbers. The Treasury then deposits the numbers in the various branches of the government, and we get to step 3. The government spends the numbers on promises, public works, social programs, and war. Then the government employees, contractors, and soldiers deposit their pay into the banks, and we get to step 4, where the banks multiply the numbers by magically inventing more IOUs through fractional reserve lending, where they steal a portion of everyone's deposit and lend it out. That currency gets redeposited, and then a portion is stolen again, and the process repeats over and over, magnifying the currency supply exponentially. Then we work for some of those numbers. Which brings us to step 5, where our numbers are taxed. We pay tax to the IRS, who then turns our numbers over to the Treasury, so the Treasury can pay the principal plus the interest on bonds that were purchased by the Federal Reserve with a check from nothing. Then we get to step 6, the debt ceiling delusion. The system is designed to require ever-increasing levels of debt and will eventually collapse under its own weight because politicians always kick the can down the road. They don't want it to collapse on their watch. And finally, step 7, the secret owners take their cut. The world's largest banks own the Federal Reserve. Those banks make a profit selling our national debts to the Fed. They make a profit when the Fed pays them interest on the reserves held at the Fed, and the Fed pays them a 6% dividend on their ownership of the Fed. This system is fundamentally evil. It funnels wealth from the working population to the government and the banking sector. It is the cause of the artificial booms and busts of modern economies, and it causes great disparity of wealth between the rich and the working class. And it is only possible because we no longer use real money, we use currency. But worst of all, it is a form of enslavement. Bond is the root word of bondage. Whenever a government issues a bond, it is a promise to make us pay.
Which creates scarcity. But it puts a group of insiders in a position of having access to all the data about the economy when we don't. So you have a small group of bankers who understand the data on how the money works in the economy, and it gives them the ability to print money in a way that the insiders are protected and everybody else is drained.
Catherine went on to compare a healthy economy to a vibrant torus, balanced, freely flowing, and energized throughout, in contrast to what's happening in our current economy.
What you have is a system that's very dynamic, and it's trying to optimize. But intertwined in the core of it, you have a tapeworm. The way a tapeworm works in your body is it injects a chemical into your body that makes you crave what's good for the tapeworm and bad for you. You have a parasite that's very much manipulating and engorging itself at the expense of the whole.
We live in a tapeworm economy, where the financial elite are the tapeworm, and they're feeding on us. And they don't like it when people blow their cover. After Catherine began exposing government corruption at the highest levels, the FBI raided her company and seized its assets. She was dragged through the courts for 10 years before being found innocent. So we've got the Federal Reserve, a privately owned corporation with a monopoly on creating money, but with no accountability, themselves out at our expense.
Many of the banks created are still the most powerful lobby on Capitol Hill, and they, frankly, own the place.
I'm convinced that the near collapse of the economy in 2008 resulted from an orchestrated pump and dump scheme designed and executed by the big bankers to consolidate wealth and power. David Icke explains how he sees the Federal Reserve rigging the so-called business cycles.
Stage 1, it's like throwing a fishing line out. Stage 1, you put lots of money, units of exchange, into circulation. You do this by pushing interest rates down, by making lots of loans. This is the part of the cycle we call a boom. Because there's lots of units of exchange in circulation, there's lots of money changing hands, that generates lots of economic activity. That generates jobs, and as more and more money is spent, there's more demand, so companies take out more loans of fresh air money to increase their production. People get confident in their everyday lives. Hey, you know, I work for this company, they've got lots of orders, it's really going great, my job's safe, I tell you what, we're going to have a bigger house. Then they start to change it. What they do is they pull the fishing line in. They push interest rates up. Now fewer people, are taking out loans, and they make the criteria for having a loan from the bank stronger anyway. And also, now, as interest rates have gone up, a larger part of people's income is going to pay back the extra interest and not being circulated in buying things. Suddenly, there's nothing like as much money in circulation, and therefore, fewer things are being bought. Companies start to go down in terms of their profits, they start to shed jobs, and they start to go out of business. People lose their jobs, they can't pay the mortgage anymore of the big house they took out in the good times. Now what the banks are doing is starting to reel the fishing line in, because as they go bankrupt, companies and individuals, the banks get the real wealth, the property, the land, the resources that they had signed to them for lending merely figures on the screen. Now this economic cycle of fishing line out, fishing line back, lots of units in circulation, pull them in, has been going on for centuries. And what it's done, it's stolen and accumulated the real wealth of the world in the hands of the few.
Like you said, it's a percentage of interest rates, and every time that people get into debt in general, or take any loan out where you always have interest, non-stop, paying off debt and debt. And what I was trying to show in that video is while you're trying to pay off your debt, you're still paying debt, more debt, more debt, more debt, interest, 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 profit, profit, profit in the bankers' pockets. And you know, they're making free money. You know, if the percentage rate of what he showed was 10% of $100, and what it ends up being 1,000. And as I said, if you up that to you know, in regards to taxes stuff, or you know, people in general, and the debt system of those countries which you would own, you'd be making very large amounts of you know, financial profit as a banker off those countries. What would tie back to what I was saying about, you know, the pre-planned colonization of America, in regards of you know, if you are pre-planned as a businessman or a banker to colonize America, you know, it would be a very big money maker based off the economic system and you know, the interest rates, inflation, deflation, and like I said, debt and tax and stuff. It's like free money to them, and every time you're taxed and stuff like that, it's basically interest in their pocket, doubling, 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 and you're still struggling while they're doubling on cash and making profit. Like I said, like there's an example as like a pawn shop, like cash converters over this side of the world. And when you go in there and you put something on buyback on pawn, you have to pay added interest to get it back. You know, when I took my phone in it, I got about 15 for it. I had to pay about 22 or something, you know, with added interest to get it back. And that's an example of a private owned business, or whatever it is, cash converters, how they work in regards of applicated to a central bank regarding a country, and how they make basically inflation or whatever, you know, increase interest from tax and stuff. And as I said, it's a perfect system for a businessman or a banker to make without losing profit, and to make off people of a country and accumulate money and stuff. And that's basically what it is. And you know, it's what he says, it's near enough a scam to the people, and you know, that's why money is near enough worthless, even on paper more so. You know, you think it's worth something, but it's not really. You know, it's just like an IOU to that central bank when you're walking around with it in your pocket. So, you know, you're paying back interest rates to those bankers themselves, and that's what you got to see on there. And that's as simple as I can put of what he explained. What David Icke mentioned about inflation, deflation, again, as you know, it's like the value of the currency or the money itself. If they inflate or deflate it, you know, if they inflate, I think it means it goes up in price, you know, in value. And people of those countries, what ties to when it deflation, what will end up being a recession, but when it inflates, basically, when they inflate the money, they make people get confident and stuff, and business and stuff. You know, they start getting over eager, thinking everything's good of what David Icke shows. If they want to, the bankers, they can just go, let's deflate it now. Then all of a sudden, things start crashing down based on interest, tax and stuff, and you know, debt itself. And those people of those countries, as much as businesses, they end up struggling, and ends up being recessions, as what's shown in Spain, Greece, what happened around the 30s, I think, America, before recently in England, or a couple of times it's happened. And that would have been central bankers, or you know, like bankers themselves, basically increasing and inflating and deflating the value of the currency or the money, as to how they did that. And they end up getting more profit from that, because people getting more debt. You know, when the money deflates, and all of a sudden, you know, they're struggling, paying more debt, because they weren't expecting, you know, this deflation in, you know, of the money. You know, they were getting eager, spending more on stuff that they didn't think would turn around on them. And then again, in the eyes of what would be scammers / bankers, big bankers, it'd be a perfect opportunity to make those profits even more and stuff. Said I'm definitely being myself. I've seen someone saying I'm not, but as I said, I'm just going with the flow and how my voice is speaking and stuff. And you know, if that's a bigger concern about what I'm talking about, that's up to you. But you know, that's up to you. But you know, that's basically what it comes down to with you know, bankers, businessmen, and how they work off the tax system, inflation, deflation, interest / tax. And how they make profits off you, and you're in continuous debt, and they're just doubling off every time, and they're always ahead of you in terms of making profits while you're still trying to catch up with debt that you'll never end up catching up with. And you know, it's a very clever system. Explaining you know, partially why I use the Morpheus skit in regards of you know, this thing where people defend the system. You know, what I used as regards of it was a concept based on my artistic side, MC side, as to why I used it, and the irrelevance of if this was a matrix simulation or the real world, why it'd make no difference. But basically I used that Morpheus skit, i.e. interlude, for my videos initially, because it's based on people who are hopelessly dependent on the system, that they would fight to protect it. And basically what he was saying in regards is the system is the money system, and they're so desperate on trying to survive for it. They're too blind to realise they're being shat on, that they'll fight to defend it, and realise, you know, that they can change things if they realise. And instead they fight to protect the money system that they're struggling to survive for. And this is what I explained before, why I initially used it before I started going into the matrix philosophies anyway. But like I said, it wouldn't make a difference in regards if it was or not, because they're both based on the real world. But I just thought I'd explain the concept of that as well. But as I said, this banking system itself, it's all run on corruptancy, and all I'll briefly put and summarise and all of that stuff, it ties to the Rothschilds. It's got connections to Bloomberg. Rothschilds owned other bankers, mentioned or investors, Rockefellers, stateside, Morgans, I'm not sure where they're from, but you know, they're all businessmen and ties and connections. And they're most likely the conflicts between China and Russia, you know, where, you know, they're basically keeping themselves to themselves in terms of business, is where, you know, these conflicts are being made between each other, because they're not businessmen cooperating with each other, the central bank owners mainly. And like I said, it's going to cause problems for them. You know, if they're having conflicts financially, economically, and they're wanting to make more profits or try and cooperate, and some are refusing. Like I said, I'm not sure about this BRICS or whatever it was, what Putin was known to have been trying to make across South America with China, I think, and a few other countries, India. But what, in regards to that attempted assassination, was to say why he was flying back from what looked like his own tried tie with Brazil and stuff to make their own banking system partnership, was all of a sudden he was nearly assassinated and stuff. And you know, I found that kind of odd in regards to ties to you know, banking and stuff in general. And you know, he's nearly assassinated and stuff. And like I said, the conflicts they're having, which are mostly banker motivated and tied. And this is what I'm trying to show to people, that, you know, most likely, even though I know more, or you know, I'm fully aware than most people, that all these things you're being told, terrorist attacks and stuff, and what's going on, or any kind of stuff you see in politics, tabloids and news, is full of lies, and the real motives behind them are bigger pictures, and you're just being shut on as much as everyone else. And no, I don't believe it's leaders of the countries either. It is those bankers that are telling what to do. And you know, the seriousness of evil behind those bankers probably makes them those leaders of those countries, and a lot of people who work for them, too scared to speak out against them in regards to power and money. But like I said in the other video, you've got people to back you up, or if you decide to investigate them and have them arrested, which Putin did want before, as I said. And from that conference, looked like he was looking for help from other countries which you were addressing, to help them cooperate to you know, to have these people arrested. And it's about changing the world, and not being run by people that tell what you to do and threaten you, you know, if you decide that you don't want to do it. And would you rather, as leaders, have those kinds of people telling you what to do, and always worried and watching your back, or nervous or anxious, you know, if you don't do it, or they'll get rid of you if they don't want you anymore because they found you useless? And like you said, I'd rather, if I was a leader of a country, you know, not have to worry about that chip on my shoulder, and run things how I want to run them, more fairly and stuff. And you know, it's up to you whether you want to investigate them, and you know, have them arrested or convicted for possible war crimes. You know, I don't have the power, but you know, I can try and put it out there and let other people see things behind to do with that. So cheers.